Hi again. This is part 2 on the research and citing sources. I was afraid I was running out of time in my other video, so I wanted to pick up where I left off, and this one should be a little bit shorter. So in video 1, we talked about the research process, and we started to talk about in-text citations, being those parenthetical or shorthand citations for when we use somebody else's ideas or words, whether that's a direct quote that has quotation marks around it, or paraphrase, which is you summarizing somebody else's words without quoting it, but still giving credit to the source in an in-text citation. I wanted to show you a few different slides to distinguish the correct way to do a citation in text. So in this passage here, we have an article being referenced. We have the author mentioned. We have his credentials mentioned, which is always good when you are quoting somebody else. And then a direct quote from Edward Coke. So life is precious, and the death penalty helps to affirm this fact. So of the two, the exact same words, same word order. The only difference between these two passages is the quotation mark is here versus here. And the title of this slide is Which is Right. And for this, it would be the second one, because when you use a quotation mark like this, it indicates to your reader that everything between my quotation marks is exactly as I found it in the original source. And by putting it here, it would imply that the original source said 857, which is not the case. We found the quote on page 857. So the quotation marks need to occur before and directly after what the person you are quoting said. So where you put the quotation mark matters. Also note that the in-text citation for this is 857, which means that we found this quote on page 857 of whatever text we're looking at, and then the period goes after that. Here's another example. Barbara Kingsolver, one of my favorite authors of fiction, here's a direct quote from her. Arguing about whether non-traditional families deserve pity or tolerance is a little like the medieval debate about left-handedness as a mark of the devil. I'm left-handed, and left-handedness has a not great history, as people have associated it with evil things. They actually forced my grandmother when she was a student to switch from a left-handed to right-handed writing because of the associations with it, but that's neither here nor there. For this example, both of these are correct, because in this one, we are directly quoting her. We have given her credit. And in this one, we are within our sentence giving credit to her. So both of these are technically correct. For this one, the only difference between these two passages is here we have the 191 in-text citation, and here we have it down here. And if you read through this, hopefully you will choose number 1, because number 1 indicates that the quote ended, and that's her direct words. Everything after that in-text citation is the author, in this case me, telling my reader how I feel about that quote and how it adds to my thesis statement. So your in-text citations or parenthetical citations give your reader an idea of when and where you're using somebody else's words or ideas. And then if there isn't an in-text citation, that means to me as the reader that those are your thoughts, those are your opinions, those are your assumptions or conclusions. So remember, in-text citations are essential to distinguishing your ideas from outside sources that you use. You will find that your paper has quite a few in-text citations, and if it isn't peppered with them throughout your paper, you're probably not going to do very well on the research component of the essay, and I might have you redo it. So it is fine to have multiple in-text citations with any one paragraph, but don't forget to put yourself in your paper too. It can't just be a bunch of other people's quotes and paraphrases that you're plopping in. You have to be in the essay as well. All right, let's move on to works cited page. As I mentioned before in video 1, it is an alphabetized list of everything that you have researched and used within your paper. It gives me, your instructor, and future readers a nice way to go track down your information to verify it and maybe do our own research. And it protects you from plagiarism. Plagiarism is the intentional or unintentional use of somebody else's ideas or words without crediting them. And oftentimes plagiarism in college and high school and beyond is unintentional. We don't know what we're doing, but As we get further along in our collegiate careers, that excuse becomes a little less convincing because most of us have grown up being told how to do citations and works cited and bibliographies. And if you ever are in doubt, I'd say oversight versus undercite, because you are then covering your butt a little bit more, if you will. So here's an example, of a quoted passage. Here's an example of a plagiarized passage, and then here is the correct one. The reason that this is plagiarized is that even though we've given the original author, Matt Sundin, credit, we have told our reader that he had these thoughts. If you look at the original quote, these are the exact words in the exact word order that Matt Sundin used. So if you're using exact words, exact word order, you have to put quotation marks around them to indicate that that's exactly what they said. So that is an example of a paraphrased passage. And, on first read, it looks good, it sounds good, but if you look at the original, it turns out that it's plagiarized. One component that you have in your Blackboard submissions is that I do check all of your submissions through a plagiarism checker. And I also set the settings to allow you to do a check yourself. So you could theoretically submit your essay a couple days before the essay is due, run a plagiarism checker, and double check what percentage you're at. Almost everyone comes up at a few percentage points because, especially when you're researching kind of common topics, chances are that you're going to use the same source or the same words that somebody else did at some point in the internet. However, if I get to see an essay that is 20, 30, 40, 50, 60% plagiarized, I do a little more digging, and then I start to look at, okay, I've had instances where people have regurgitated their old roommates' essays and turned it in under their own name. That's an F. Have taken a paper off the internet. That's an F. So it's a way for you to safeguard yourself before you give me your final submission to make sure that you are not plagiarizing. And again, all of your essays that you submit go through that plagiarism checker. So in this second essay, you're required to have at least 2 quotes within the paper, so direct words of somebody else, and then 3 paraphrase passages. So paraphrases are you summarizing somebody else's words or ideas. And in order to do that correctly and to avoid plagiarism, you have to do a couple things. You have to change the original language of the sentence. And if you have a thesaurus, check for synonyms, look for words that you can alternate and use instead. But you can't just go through and do a synonym replacement and have it exactly in the same word order. That's basically plagiarizing too. You need to rearrange the structure of the sentence. It kind of sounds like madness and like you're jumping through hoops, but teachers and professors love it when you paraphrase because it shows a couple things. It shows you understand the material that you read, that you can summarize it accurately for your reader, and that you can demonstrate those critical thinking and writing skills to your instructor and to your audience. So we prefer it over copying and pasting somebody else's quote. It's pretty easy to go copy, paste, great quote, beautiful. The times when you want to quote somebody directly would be it's poetic, it's beautiful, you could never write it as poetically as they did, so you give them credit. I think phrases by Mark Twain. I love his writing, and he has a unique sense of humor and style, and I want to be authentic to what he says. If it's so controversial that you don't want to say it yourself, if it is filled with figures, stats, numbers that you don't want to try to paraphrase, especially very specific numbers, things like that you want to directly quote, but for the most part, you can usually err on the side of paraphrasing. So here's an example. There used to be a show on National Public Radio called Click and Clack, the Tappet Brothers, who were 2 mechanics out of Boston, Cambridge, who people would call in and have car troubles, and these 2 mechanics would diagnose those issues over the phone. One of them has now passed on, but their names were Tom and Ray Magliazzi. And so this is a quote from that source. The automotive industry has not shown good judgment in designing automotive features that distract drivers. So here's a direct quote from Tom. And here's a plagiarized quote, and I've underlined, or plagiarized passage, I've underlined all the places where it is plagiarized. So again, we've given credit to Tom Magliozzi. That's good. We've told our reader what page it's on, but we have not put direct quotation marks around these underlined phrases that are exactly the same words and exactly the same word order as the original passage. Here's an example of a better passage. So radio host Tom Magliozzi claims that motor vehicle manufacturers do not always design features with driver safety in mind. It's the same idea. I'm still giving credit to Magliozzi. I'm still telling you the page number I found it on, but I'm putting those words into my own words and rearranging the order. So again, I've demonstrated to my reader, I understand the passage. Here's what I think it meant. I'm giving credit to Tom. I always tell students to resist the urge to look at the original passage when you're paraphrasing, because you'll be tempted to borrow those words in that word order. Read it, set it aside, try your hand at summarizing, go back, look at the words, look at the word order, see what you need to change. Paraphrasing takes extra work. It takes extra practice. So don't imagine that you're going to sit down and write the first thing that you think of and that it's going to be perfect. It does take some extra thinking and some extra work. The other thing I want you to think about as you write your research paper is that you can't just come in and say, John Green says that drugs are bad. First of all, as a reader, I want to know who John Green is, and I want to know how current the information is and where you found it. There's lots of John Greens in the world, and some of them are qualified to make that opinion, and some of them are less qualified. So you want to introduce signal phrases. So according to Janet Anderson, I've given her name. She's a doctor. We know she's a doctor. Head of pediatrics at Baltimore Medical. So we know that she's a doctor of pediatrics. She heads that department, and we know which specific hospital she works for. Those all give me, as the reader, confidence that you have done your homework, that you're quoting credible people, and you've told me where I could do a quick Google search and go find Janet if I needed to. Those are the things that I want you to do in your paper. So here's an example of a dropped or plopped quote. I just copy paste. I thought it sounded good. I don't give it any context. I don't tell you who said it. I don't tell you how current it is, especially if you're doing research on medical or scientific research. Things change frequently. It seems like every other week, coffee's good, coffee's bad, eggs are good, eggs are bad. So we need to know, especially for those types of topics, how current the information is. So again, here's an example in a 2010 article from the Journal of Medicine. Quote, 50% of doctors surveyed found that teens eat too much and move too little. So we give it context, we give it background, we help build up the confidence for our reader. So again, example of a dropped quote. I haven't set it up. I haven't told you where it's coming from. And if I wanted to fix it, I would do something like this. According to Tina Kelly, clerk of courts, blah, 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 blah. And then this in red is me as the writer commenting on what I think that passage means. Now, you'll find that pie paragraphs, point, illustration, explanation, are the easiest way to construct your paragraphs for research papers like this when you're using other people's ideas or words. And I will have a video on pie soon. So here's an example of when to quote, vivid, accurate. It explains a position by somebody who is highly credible, and it is controversial. So those are times when you'd prefer to quote, but more often than not, you'd prefer to paraphrase. Those are some of your requirements for this paper. And then there are some resources that you might find helpful as you do your citations. So that is part 2 on research and citing sources. There will be more videos to come, especially on paraphrasing and on what I was just talking about, and I've already forgotten, which is the pie paragraphs. All right. Happy researching, happy writing.